Hi guys, and welcome to the second part of this JavaScript Introduction course. My name is Thomas, and we will get after a little bit of JavaScript theory in this section. Let's get after it. All right, so last time we left off after building this Hello World application or Hello World example, very simple one. We created a HTML file, and we had a little bit of JavaScript to create a new node for us and fill it with some HTML and append it to our page, which basically just exemplified how we can work with JavaScript on our pages. Now, I also introduced you to a concept, a very important concept called debugging. I stopped the execution here at this in this example on line 13 by setting a breakpoint in my developer tools and stepped over the execution, and you could see in real time what is happening while code is being executed. Now, debugging, developer tools, etc., a little bit over your pay grade perhaps at this early stage in your development. So let's start with that before we move on to what we came for today, which is the basic theory. Now, if you want to open the developer tools in your browser, and every browser or major browsers have those. I'm a Chrome kind of guy, so I use Chrome in this course. If you are new at this, do use Chrome as well, because it will help you to recognize on your own screen what I'm doing in these recordings. But if you're using Firefox or Safari or whatever you're using, that's perfectly fine. If you're using Internet Explorer, I can't really help you because I haven't used that browser in a long time, so I do not know how that works, but I assume that they have developer tools as well. Anyways, if you want to access those tools, let me show how you do it. On a Mac, there are certain keys that I can press, but there's a much simpler way to do that. And that is basically if you open up a new tab and you right click anywhere on the screen and you choose the word inspect or the option inspect. I have a Swedish version of my browser, so it says inspektera in Swedish, but in English it says inspect. In any respective language that you have, you can probably recognize that word. You choose that, you open up the developer tools. And the important thing that we want to use at this stage is the console app. There are a few tabs here, and we will go over most of them during this course, but you have one that is called console, and that's exactly the one we want to use. Let me see if I can clear this. Right. No, I can't get rid of this. Sorry. So no. Anyway, now there is another way to execute your JavaScript code on your computer, should you want to do that, and that is to go over to your CLI, and if you have a piece of software called Node installed, and you can check that by typing node-v in your terminal. If you don't have it, then don't worry about it for now. We will add it later on. But if you have it, you will see a number pop up here, and then you can open up an interactive console by just typing node here, and that will change the look of your terminal, and because you will be in an interactive console for JavaScript, where you can basically execute all JavaScript. So I can do a basic addition here like this, and that would be equal to 60. 20 plus 40 is 60. Now I'm just going to say .exit to get out of there. We will not focus on that console at the moment because we want to work in our browser. There's a different, sometimes when you work, you will have your console filled with some text. Again, here we see some warnings. We want to get rid of them. There is this this sign you can click, or you can press Ctrl L or options or Command K on your Mac if you want to clear this. You can also always issue the clear command like this to clear the console. if it's filled with a lot of information, and it's a little bit too much for you. All right. Anyways, let's get after it and talk a little bit about variables, some data types, and some other stuff that are really important for you to move forward with this course. So variables in JavaScript, variables are containers for storing data values, like boxes that you want to where you want to store some data. And also you can give those boxes names or label those boxes so you can recognize that data. So let's see, if I want to declare a variable or create a box, for instance, I can say var my name like this, and that will create a box for me. It's an empty box. I haven't assigned a value to it yet, but it is actually a box. So what I just did was to declare a variable using the var keyword. I have to say I'm declaring a variable, and I say var and then my name. Now in ES6 you can do the same thing by saying let my name, but in my case now I cannot do it because the identifier my name has already been declared, and I cannot redeclare it using that. Now what I want to do at this point is to clear my memory. Just a side note on this one, I want to reload this page like this and clear it, and now I can safely redeclare this one because my memory has been purged by this reload process. So I have declared a variable called my name, and I'm also going to declare one called my age. So I have two variables, and they are not filled with any values yet. We'll get to that in just a second. Now I just want to talk a little bit very briefly about naming guidelines. I will attach them to the course documentation that follows along with this course as well. Now, what you can, when you define or declare a variable, the first character needs to be a letter. It can also be an underscore or a $sign, and these are the three types or allowed characters in the beginning of a variable. It cannot be a number, and it cannot be a special character in any way. So let's see. Let's create a variable with a $sign, for instance. So dollar and then salary, for instance, or we can call it base salary, for instance, if you want to. That's perfectly fine. And you can also create one with an underscore, general rule, for instance, right? That's also okay. However, if you want to create one, a variable with a number in the beginning, and I will say first round, for instance, round 1, right? It's perfect. This will render an error. That's not possible. However, you can have a number somewhere inside of the name. So round 1 would actually work. That's perfectly fine. Now, you cannot have spaces. So you cannot say round 1 like this. That would not fly. But what you could have is a character inside, and that would work perfectly fine in this case. Now, there are many other rules or best practices regarding names of variable, how you name them, and we will get back to that later on. Now, once you have created or declared a variable, you want to initialize it with it or give it its initial value. So, for instance, my name it's undefined at this stage, right? It doesn't hold any value at all, but I can assign a value, and it's very simple to do that. You can just do that by saying by using the equal sign and assigning a value to it. And in this case, I want to assign a value, a string, saying Thomas, that's my name, and I can do this. And if I just now type my name, I can see that it's Thomas and it's perfect like that. That's great. Okay, so we have initialized this variable. Now, an interesting thing is that, as the name implies, variables, the values can actually vary, right? So I can reassign this value, or this variable a new value should I want to do that. So for instance, my name could in principle be for like Oliver, for instance, right? And now it is no longer Thomas, it is Oliver, like this. So that's a perfectly valid value, perfectly valid thing to do, to change the values of the of variables. Now, there is of course variables where you, and the occasions where you don't want your variables to be reassigned, and for that we are using a concept called constants, and we can. So constants in JavaScript are pretty much variables, except that their values cannot be changed. They're immutable, as we often refer to them as. They cannot be reassigned. And instead of using let or var keywords to create them, we use the const keyword, and we can say name equals, or you know what? Let's call it pin code. Pin code. Sorry. Pin code equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now, if I try to, I can read it, I can see what it is. But if I try to reassign the value, a new value to it, like this, that will not be. I will not be able to do that. Assignment to a constant variable. So constants are values that are immutable. Now, quite often, the naming rules. Well, first of all, the naming rules for constants are the same as for variables, but there is it's a common practice among many developers that they use uppercase or capitalized letters to assign for readability purposes. I sometimes use that, sometimes I don't. You don't have to do it, but again, readability of code is something really important. We'll touch upon that later on, and I just wanted to mention this. And you have to understand that you can store any sort of data into a variable or a constant. There can be various data types like strings, numbers, etc. And there can also be more. They can also be more complex data types like objects, array, and even functions. I will touch upon that. But let's start with the basics, and we will talk about numbers, strings, booleans, etc. Now, you already seen me assign. Let's clear this and actually reload this and clear this. Now, let's see what we can do with numbers to start. Well, you saw me assign numeric values to a variable, 48 my age, and so on. But let's work with that a little bit. So let's say let my age be 48, like this, right? And so I can always check the type of my value by using the type of function. It's not the best function ever, because it gives you sometimes very confusing answers. But in this case, if I just check the type of 48, it is a number, and if I check the type of the value stored in the variable my age, it's also a number, of course, right? Now, if I would create another variable, and I say my name, and I will set that to Thomas again, and I will check type of my name, like this, we can see that data type is a string. So a string is basically text that is assigned to a variable, and you can you can have multiple use cases for storing that whatever text you want to display on a page or inside or using your software is going to be a string. Now, an interesting thing with strings that they can be combined. They can be concatenated. They can be combined. So let's say that I can say my name plus senior, for instance, right? SR. I don't know why I would like to do that. I can add this. Now it combines them without any spaces. So if I really want to have a space, I would have to add a space to the other one, like this. So I can use the plus sign to combine them together. But in ES6, you can also do something like something called template literals, and for that you use backticks like this. I will add a section how you can access backticks on your keyboards, but basically they are like single quotes that are tilted a little bit, or italic single quotes, if that's even a good explanation. Anyway, I could now say my name is, and I want to say Thomas that I have stored in the my name variable, and for that I use a very specific process. I type a $sign and 2 curly brackets, and I just inside of the curly brackets I say my name like this, and we can see that my name is Thomas. That's good. At this stage, I would like you I would like to introduce you to a concept called console log, which is a way to output data or information into your console from your piece of software. We can use it here, but it really comes into play when you write your own software and execute it inside of your browser. Anyway, if you say console.log and open up parentheses and put any value you want inside there, that will actually output it as a text. And there's a difference here, very small for you guys, perhaps at this point, but this is treated like a text totally, and this actually returns the value, which is small but very important difference here. So anyway, now you've seen console log. There's much more to say about that, but we'll get to that later. And you've seen me do something called string interpolation, meaning that I inject data into a string via this $sign curly bracket syntax, right? Okay, so let's clear this again. Let's talk a little bit about Booleans. A Boolean is a data type that only has 2 values, true or false. True generally means correct or yes, that condition has been fulfilled, and whereas false means no or incorrect or something that's negated. So let's see. Let me just create 2 variables. One called JavaScript is interpreted, and another one called JavaScript is difficult to learn. And these are set to true or false, right? So if I just check the value of this, you can do this. You can check the value for this. And I also deliberately created 2 variables with very long names, and this calls for a small short explanation. Now, I really despise single letter variable names like X, Y, Z, I, A, or B, or whatever. In real software, sometimes when I play around with some concepts in my console, I can use them, but in software, I would say that the labels that we put on our variables should be descriptive of what sort of data they actually hold or contain. And single letters won't do it for me, but there's a balance to maintain, and I think that too long variable names are also a negative thing. So this is really a corner case. Again, I'm just playing around, but still I shouldn't be assigning too long names. Keep it short and neat, but descriptive enough. Now there's another value, another data type that is called null, that is quite handy to have, because sometimes it's not enough with undefined. You actually want to assign a value but you don't really want it to be anything, and therefore you can do you can use null. So I can assign declare a variable called nothing and just call it null if I want. And then if I check type of nothing, then that is a little bit confusing, because it actually returns object and it's not really an object. Welcome to JavaScript land, people. And then but there is a data type called null, and there's also another one called undefined, and it's another special value in JavaScript when a variable is declared but not initialized, or it hasn't been assigned a value. It is undefined because no value has been given to that value. So that's it. So let's just check that. Let's empty var. I'm just going to declare it, and then I'm going to check type of empty var like this, and it says it returns undefined, which is really weird in my opinion. Why null? When when we check the type of nothing, it returned object, and it doesn't return null. But anyway, it's okay. That's the way it is. All right, so let's see if we can do some calculations. Aromatic operators. As every other programming language, JavaScript provides us with aromatic operators, which offers us a math library that does a lot of work for us, so we can focus on writing great code instead for reinventing the wheel over and over again. And the basic aromatic operators are, of course, addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication, right? So you can do 3 plus 2 is 5, and it doesn't really matter where you put the plus sign. In my opinion, you should have spaces in between for readability purposes. You can do 10 divided by 2. You can do 10 times 5. And you can subtract things like 9 minus 3, for instance, right? And you can get those answers. That's pretty straightforward. And now, of course, if you create 2 variables, for instance, you say let value 1 equals 10, and let value 2 equals 20. And then you say val1 plus val2 like this, and that will be 30, right? And of course, if you say val2 minus val1, that subtracts, and so on and so forth, right? So if you say val2 divided by val1, and so on, right? Now, the interesting thing here is, of course, how we can put this to use. For instance, right? So let's say that we create a variable called, let's say red cars equals 5, and let blue cars equals 6, and now let total cars equals red cars plus blue cars, like this, right? And then, oh, I misspelled because I said total cars. Now I just made a typo. Total, it's supposed to be total cars. Total cars equals red cars plus blue cars. And now I could say something like console log and I can use that data to string interpolate, and we could say something like I have a total of, and then interpolate this and say total cars, and then an exclamation mark, because I'm really happy about that thing. So this should equal to 11 cars. Like I have a total of 11 cars now, and I really make spelling mistakes. Just a lesson learned on this one. I was trying to correct my total cars to total cars, but I misspelled that to total cars for some reason. But I did manage to use that perfectly fine inside my string interpolator. But you know, that's a rookie mistake. I shouldn't be doing that. Anyways, let's stick to the total cars for this exercise, and just make a mental note to double or even sometimes triple check your spelling before you hit that enter button. Anyways, what happens now if I change the value, reassign the value of red cars to 10, right? And I try to reissue that command about outputting something to console log, right? And I can do that by navigating on my keyboard with my up and down arrows. And you can see that I'm changing the commands that have been issued. And I have 10 red cars, and I still have 6 blue cars, which means that the total cars or total cars should equal to 16, but it doesn't. It's still 11 cars, because I should make the calculation here instead, right? Or assign this to a function or something like that. Now, in this case, I'm just going to make it easy for me, and I will say red cars plus blue cars here, rather than storing it intermediately in total cars. And now it does say 16 cars. I just want you to be mindful about these kind of things when those calculations are being done, and how that actually works. All right, so there are two different data types that I want you to learn about before we take a break and end this section, and that is arrays and objects. Now, let me show you a little bit about objects first. Now, let's say that we've already worked with storing age, name, and city, or age, name, and stuff like that into various variables. How if I would like to combine them into one single entity? And for that, we can use an object. And there's many other things to be said about objects, but I want to start out very slow. So let me say that I want to create a variable, and I want to call it person. And I want this to be an object. And for that, I'm going to use 2 curly brackets. And I want this guy, this person, to have a name. So I can do this. I can say name and colon, and then say as a string Thomas. And I'm going to issue a comma, because I want to give it another attribute. I want to give it an age attribute, and there I want to store just a number. And the last one will be, let's say, city, and a colon, and I will say Gothenburg, like this. Okay, so now we have a real object. So if you say type of person, that is actually an object. We've seen this before, but they weren't really objects in that sense of the word. So let's say that I want to access the name of this person. For that, I can type person.name, and that will return Thomas. Consequently, if I want to know about his age, I do person.age. And lastly, if I want to access the city, I could do this, which means that I could say console log like this, and I can say something like that. My name is person.name. I am person.age years old, and I live in person.city, and then a dot. My name is person name, I am person age years old, and I live in person city. And we hit enter, and we get the string returned with that data interpolated. Okay, so that's about objects very briefly. There's tons of things that we're going to cover about objects. the last thing I want to say is to show you an array, a collection. An array is like a container for many values. So let's say we're gonna create an array storing the names of Thomas, Oliver, Elliot, and Thaddeus, which happens to be the names of my sons. And if we say type off on that one, it also return object, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, right. Which is not really an object. It is in a sense, but not really. But what can we do with this collection? Well, we can iterate over this, and this is a little bit over your pay grade, but I still want you to adhere to this. We will work with operators in the next section. Now, if we say names, and we use a command called for each, and then we store. So for each will loop over this array, and we have 4 values in that array: Thomas, Oliver, Elliot, and Thaddeus. And what this will do is we're going to iterate over it, and intermediary will store each of this of the objects or values that are currently being worked on in a local variable called name that will only be available for us for that iteration. And then we want to console log just some text. The current name is the name. This will output this. The current name is 4 times. If I hit enter like this, it just goes over and over again, and when it's done basically, and returns this to our console. Now we will go over this kind of iterators, for each, and many others in a different section of this course. But I just wanted to show you this, that it's possible to do those things in your console. Now, in order to add new line breaks in the console, you need to hold down your Shift key and enter, because the enter key will execute code, and you have to be really careful about that in your console. So Shift enter to add new lines, basically. All right, there are many other things that we want to cover. We will give it a rest for now. In the next section, we will actually build a little bit of software, a small little web application that will help us to calculate our body mass index, of all things. The interesting part with that is that there is a small little algorithm that needs to be written and calculated, and we will allow our users to access some data. But that will come in the next section. Thank you very much for now. I see you then.